I'm really happy to introduce him. He's got 25 years of experience. He's co-founder of Captains of Industry, which is a strategic marketing firm and video production place.
Thanks for having me. We're a creative shop in Boston that focuses primarily on content that pulls the right customers to our client's website. And as you can tell by our name, we're also clearly very humble and modest as a firm in the way we approach things. We've thought a lot about culture at Captains of Industry. Culture is really the number one thing for us, and I think it's the number one thing, or it should be the number one thing for more companies, because my feeling is if you get the culture right, everything else falls into place. And it's interesting when we looked at other companies, and I've worked at some very big companies. Started out in New York at a big agency. Typically, what they do is they put together their mission, vision, and value statements. They bring in a high-priced consultant. But the problem is that they all tend to look the same. I don't know if you noticed that. You go around different companies and you go by the water cooler, and there's the mission, vision, and value statements, and it's all Helvetica on a white background, and it's all by the water cooler. And the mission statements are something like Fundibulum Technologies. Our mission is to drive forward the use of software for a variety of applications, making life easier for citizens around the world. And then their top core value is innovation. And I'm thinking, really? If your top core value is innovation, then why is this boring poster by the water cooler that looks like every other mission statement? And what's happening is that companies are inadvertently switching their mission statement based on how they're conveying it. So the mission statement becomes Fundibulum Technologies. We're basically like everybody else. So at Captains of Industry, we were thinking, well, we're a creative shop. We should really try to actually walk the walk and be creative and make a culture that fosters creative thinking among everyone. So what we did was we put together what we call a manifesto. And the manifesto is a whole series of posters that live online and on the web that encapsulate just a broad range of thinking. It's our thinking of how do you tackle a challenge? How do you work with people? How do you actually communicate with people one-on-one in a way that really resonates with them? How do you have fun? What is the value of chaos? I mean, there's a whole range of thinking here that goes into these, but they're created in a way that has some really tasty design and headlines, so the message of how we convey it is part of how it works. And that's really important. And when I talk about getting everyone creative, I want to be clear that this is not just what we think of in the advertising world as the creatives, copywriters like me, or art directors. We're talking everybody, the office manager, the admin people. It should be really something that we end the monopoly on creativity and you make it something that everyone can participate in. And when that happens, it completely transforms the culture. And I can tell you from personal experience, during the height of the Great Recession, it was our office manager at the time who came up with an idea that virtually saved the company. She was creative. So I'm just going to dive in and just show you some of the manifesto posters and talk about them, and then we can answer questions later. So the headline here is, the biggest risk you can take as a marketer is to be safe. When I started out in New York at a big agency, I had a whole wall of my cubicle that was covered with ads that I loved and the other people in the agency loved, but I was never allowed to show them to the client, because there was layer upon layer upon layer of hierarchy above me. And somewhere in that hierarchy was someone who said, you know what, it's a little edgy. might be a little too bold for them. So it just got relegated to my wall. And what happens is that because work gets dumbed down through the hierarchies, it ends up becoming invisible. So people are covering their butts and putting work out there that's really not serving the client well. So at Captain's, we thought, let's actually make it part of the culture that you have to take risks. It's okay to fail. But let's put the work in front of the client that we actually love. Now, interestingly, we've had this poster up on our office for a while, and the captains, not me, just other folks on staff said, well, why don't we start making videos based on the different principles that are embodied in these manifesto posters. So I'm going to show you one of those videos.
Push. Almost there. One more. There we go. It's a boy. And quite handsome, I might add.
So pretty.
Look, baby, he's smiling.
It's beautiful.
He's the most beautiful baby I've ever seen.
Yeah. That's gonna be a problem.
What's wrong?
Your baby is too pretty.
Are you serious?
I think in this case we may want to tone it down a bit, just to be safe. You agree, nurse?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Here. Have the child wear this prosthesis, only for the first 10 years or so, just to be safe. You can find that at a Walmart, CVS. Much safer.
You're going to go back to your office today and they'll say, what did you do this morning? I say, I don't know, this is so wrong. You may notice some similarity between the young father in that film and Mr. Ted Dillon, who's here today. And shout out to Anna Sternoff at Captain's for helping produce and make this stuff happen.
Just in general.
What's it?
Just like in general.
Yeah, in general. So another really important principle here with our frog being dissected is great work comes from understanding. And I know this is something that companies talk about. We really take it to the next level at Captain's of Industry whenever we can. And I'll give you an example of that. Within the past 6 months, we were hired to work with a consortium of companies that included Nike, Starbucks, Levi's, eBay, Stonyfield Farms, the Portland Trailblazers, and a whole bunch of other firms to develop a message platform for communicating with their customers, the American consumer, about climate change. So this was a common message platform for all of these big companies, so they could really get people fired up to do something about climate change. So for 6 weeks, we really dug into every little piece of research that we could find. We looked at what's going on in the press. We looked at what's going on in all the different media, politicians. We dug into research. We had a stack of research that was practically as tall as I am. And everyone at the company was just digging through this stuff. We looked at information from Yale University on climate change communications, and we found that there was not one or two mindsets for the American consumer about climate change. There's actually at least 6 Americas. And every one segment of the American public needed a different messenger, a unique message, and it all had to work within an umbrella. And only once we'd done that for 6 weeks of intense research and being in conference rooms where we were shooting each other's ideas full of holes, only then did we develop the creative. And that's what these big companies are now working on. I hope to have news on that campaign within the next few months. This leads to the next idea, which is you don't need a big agency, you need a big idea. To win that piece of business on climate change, working with Nike and Starbucks, Captains of Industry competed against 7 global agencies, and we have 12 people. So we were up against firms with hundreds and hundreds of employees, sometimes thousands of employees, with offices in major cities around the world. And I point this out not to blow our own horn, but to say that any company can do this. And our thinking on this was, having worked at much bigger companies, that it's typically, even if you have hundreds of employees at a big firm, it's often only a handful of those who are the ones who come up with big ideas. So at Captains of Industry, we thought, let's hire them. Let's only hire them. And our mantra for hiring is, only hire people who are smarter than you in some way. Which when I was first starting out at Captains was relatively easy, because just about everybody is smarter than me. But as we've grown and having even just 12 people, it gets harder and harder to find those people who are just a little bit smarter than you in some way. And that was really the impetus for this. And we tell this to clients, and that's an important aspect of the manifesto too, that we're building an internal creative culture for ourselves so that you walk in the building and everyone has a common mindset and kind of frame to work from. But it's also really important for prospective clients to understand what the company is about, what makes us tick. It goes beyond the traditional way of telling people your ideas. This is pretty central to the culture. Fun and business are not mutually exclusive. This poster was actually made by hand. It was hand-stitched by someone who was into stitching, and then photographed. I could probably sum up a big part of the fun culture with the word bananagrams. That's definitely one thing, but there's all kinds of things that we do at the company. From Friday afternoons at 4 o'clock is typically, we call that beer o'clock. So we institute beer into the culture. And central to the idea of play, and there's all kinds of play that goes on. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you're ever out, just when, in a field when it's getting dark and the stars are starting to come out. And this happened with my son, who has better eyesight than me. We were looking up and trying to spot the stars as they came out. And it's easy to look at the stars that are really bright, but the stars that are fainter, and there's a name for this effect, that if you look at it directly, you can't see it. But if you look a little bit to the right or left, your peripheral vision shows you the fainter star. And I think that's what play does for creativity. It helps you stop looking directly at a problem and moves you in a different direction, so your brain is free to start thinking creatively. So we do that in every aspect of the culture, and it's also something that's not top-down. That's really central to how we've made our culture work, is that everyone is empowered to really come up with ideas and to challenge me. I am challenged every day, all the time. And that's exactly as it should be. And when we've invented the culture, we've freed people to do different things. Like we have a loft space in our office, which we call the champagne room. Don't read anything too much into that, but it's basically where there's a Nintendo Wii, there's various things there. But what we did, my business partner Fred Soar and I, is we allocated money for the staff to do whatever they wanted in that loft space. And it wasn't a ton of money, but they got very inventive with it. They made furniture, Mr. Dillon here, made furniture out of shipping pallets. And they spent, I think, most of the money on a widescreen TV, which is fine, which is great. So it's really, they made it happen. And I think to have a culture that's creative, you have to walk the walk, and you have to free people to do things on their own and to kind of get out of the way. And that's kind of the best part of it. This concept is called You're Always Talking to One Little Buckaroo. When my daughter was a little girl, she used to watch Mr. Rogers, whom she called Wodgers. And I would find myself sitting there for a little while, often watching Mr. Rogers too, as an adult. And he was a really fascinating character. He had this way about him where he really connected with kids in ways that most TV personalities and cartoons don't. And he was once asked, how do you connect with kids in such a fundamental way? And he said, I never forget that I'm always talking to one little buckaroo. So we take that to heart at Captains, and that goes into our thinking with every campaign we make, whether we're making a video or a print piece or a website. And it all kind of ties together, because when we're working on this campaign around climate change, we weren't thinking, how do we talk to the American consumer? There is no American consumer. There's one little buckaroo. And we need to determine the most important buckaroos that we're going to talk to and exactly what was up here. And that again relates to other parts of the manifesto, like great work comes from understanding. So the manifesto, in a way, creates a kind of tapestry of thinking with ideas that feed on each other and lead to the best overall creative product. And it also makes for a place that's just fun to work. And getting, just diving back into the idea that you don't need a big agency, you need a big idea. It probably sounds easy to say, oh, we just hire the people who are big idea people. But how do you actually do that? And we used to spend a ton of money on headhunters, who cost a fortune. You can run ads in different publications. You can do social media, which is great, we do that. But we didn't get enough resumes coming in until we kind of changed the equation and made the whole culture something that attracted the right people. So just as advertising has changed, so it's based less on interruption and more on engaging people with social media and content that pulls them in, you need a company culture which acts as a magnet. And the only reason why I'm here today is because we've started to create a culture that is that magnet, because it's creative. I mean, most people, just from my experience, especially junior level people, are not often asked their ideas. And sometimes folks who are right out of college, or if they work at other shops and they come work at Captains of Industry, I'll turn to them and say, what do you think? And it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever picked up a cat or a dog from a shelter, and they startle easily. And it feels that way sometimes when I turn to people and say, what do you think? And they think, are you talking to me? Yeah, I'm really curious what you think. So, someone who's, a month out of college is really throwing, or interns, like Rella, who's here today, are part of this process and throwing ideas out at a level that they simply wouldn't be allowed to have that kind of creative input at a lot of places. So when you democratize the process, at least in our experience, you get really fresh ideas from people. And it's also something that they really enjoy. I mean, part of having, a nice creative culture, does tie in with HR. You need to attract the best and brightest people, but you also need to keep them. And if you lose people, it's very disruptive to the culture, it's disruptive to the client experience, and it's expensive to have to go out and hire new people. And in the past 2 years, virtually no one has left the company, and the number of resumes coming to the company has skyrocketed. So we have a greater talent pool to choose from, and they were able to cherry pick the people who are the big thinkers. Service matters. I'm going to date myself here, but when I was a kid, and I would be with my mom or my dad, we'd drive into a gas station. The gas station attendants wore ties. They had hats. Everything was clean. And you pulled into the full service section. They said, good morning. They checked the oil. They washed the windshield. They filled up the tank. And they smiled and they said, thank you so much. And I think as a culture, in the United States and elsewhere, I think we've lost part of that. Everything is about convenience, which is great. We pump our own gas, we kind of expect to do this. But at Kaplan's, we take the idea of serving a client to the nth degree, and to have that sense of delight that you know that someone is there for you. And if it's 7 o'clock at night and a FedEx is, it can't go to the drop-off box anymore, we have volunteers saying, I'll take it to Logan, I'll do it. Because that's part of the culture. So it's not just a matter of being creative, it's how we work with other people. And to think about service not only for servicing the clients, which is important because they pay us, but it's also how we provide service to each other at the company. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Moneyball. You seen Moneyball? I love that movie because it pertains to baseball, obviously, but it also pertains to companies and cultures, very much so. I mean, the definition of a team to me is getting people who all have their own flaws, but they're able to complete a puzzle in a way that makes them unique and makes them stand out. And I think the trick is to create an environment where people who are flawed are making up for each other's flaws, but also adding to the culture in a way that instills a kind of magic. And I love the fact that, you know, Steve Jobs would talk about, you know, his products in a magical way. And it does. You see that embodied in iPhones and other technologies. But I think you could have that sense of magic with a company culture. And if it's designed the right way, then you're a magnet for other people who appreciate that culture. But it's also a magnet for ideas that just kind of spring out of the ether. Because, you know, we don't have a monopoly on, you know, creative thinking or ideas. There's lots of, you know, great shops in Boston and elsewhere. So, but if we can have our own way of going about it and deliver it in a way that's unique and fun and different, then that helps us stand out and be competitive. And you also don't have to be a big company to be a great company. So I think I'm going to probably wrap up this section of my presentation. But if you're curious to learn more about the manifesto, it's all on our website, and it's always evolving. So there'll be more completely twisted, weird videos, I'm sure, coming out that we developed together. And we also, you know, what's great to be here is that just to be part of the larger community and recognize that we don't have all the ideas, and just to connect with everyone. So it'd be great if we could all, you know, connect on our Facebook page and Twitter and just be part of this larger conversation. So with that, I'll just, I guess, take questions.
You said that, oh, I don't want the microphone. You said that you don't need a big agency, you need a big idea. How do you know what the right size is for your company? Like, if you're drawing a distinction between 12 people versus 100 people, why not have 6? Or why not have 20? Like, how did you determine that sweet spot?
So the question is, how do you determine the sweet spot in terms of number of employees who are the right number and mix, if I understand, to come up with those big ideas? And I don't have an answer in terms of, I mean, aside from the fact that it's whatever kind of feels right.
Yeah.
And if I was a more analytical person, I would probably say it's 12, or I'd say it's 20, or what have you. But I think in the way that we go about it, like we're constantly looking at new resumes and meeting new people. And as we look at other people, we think, oh, well, they could fit in here. They could complement the structure here. So, and there's sometimes we hire people before we even have enough work for them, but we know that they're going to be someone who contributes and help us get to the next level. So I think if we were much bigger, we'd have to find a way to divide into smaller teams so that there was still that kind of small entrepreneurial feeling. So we could be 100 people, not likely, but a larger number, but still feel autonomous in small units. So it's less about size and more about team structure. I think that's probably the best answer I could give.
Okay, thanks.
All the way in the back. Yeah, when you're hiring people in the interview process, can you think of like 2 or 3 unusual questions you might ask to evaluate their level of creativity?
Funny you should ask that. One of the things that I ask that sometimes, it's less about evaluating creativity, but just understanding the mindset, is I'll ask them what their favorite movie is. And if you ask yourself that question, it's actually pretty hard to answer, and sometimes you've got to be pretty quick on your feet. But it shows a window into what the person's tastes are and their thought level that I think guides me in particular into understanding how they're going to fit into the culture. If they picked some really, really horrible film, and I won't mention any particular names, but I think it would make me rethink whether they would fit in with the culture. In terms of creative questions, I personally don't tend to answer have the brain teaser questions or kind of force a particular answer. Aside from, what is something you've done that you failed miserably at? Because Anna brought up a good question that I actually asked earlier, I forgot, which is how do you organize your sock drawer? And this is actually very important to me because my sock drawer is a complete mess. And the only reason why it has any organization at all is because my wife puts laundry in different places. I wash the laundry, she puts it away. So that's the only organization that exists. If someone is going to be in charge of handling an account and dealing with budgets and has to have file drawers and to be able to deal with the complexity of a big account, they kind of need to be someone who organizes, at least puts the socks together in pairs, and probably has them color-coded. And if they're on the extreme edge of the scale, they actually have them organized by day. So they have their red socks for Monday, they have their blue long socks for Tuesday. I haven't quite hit that level of extreme. But if you can get a window into people's thinking in other parts of their lives, it does help inform the rest of it. That's a good question.
I have to ask, it's sort of a silly question, but I got to know, what is your favorite movie other than Moneyball?
My favorite movie, there's kind of 2 categories. My overall favorite movie is Lawrence of Arabia, David Lean film, just because of that character and the story. And a close second is Dr. Strangelove. And folks on staff who are in their 20s just think that's incredibly ancient to love a black and white film from the 60s. But I just love the twisted humor in it, and so that would tell you something about me. That Lawrence of Arabia, David Lean, big picture story with totally whacked comedy with Peter Sellers playing a deranged Nazi in a wheelchair. So 2 spectrums, yes. It's kind of like my sock drawer. It's all over.
This might sound more confrontational than I intended.
Is there another question I could someone else?
So how is all this not just an excuse to get people to work till 7 p.m. to send that letter to FedEx?
So the question is, why are you so great? And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's too much coffee. It's the coffee talking. The question was, how is this all not an excuse to get people working later, so they're the ones who send the FedEx? I think the answer would be that we tend not to be working later. If you ask anyone here who's from Captains of Industry, they will tell you that they have more quality of life at Captains of Industry than any other company they've worked at. And it's because we're helping each other get the job done, and we're also managing client expectations in a way that's nice. And we're not, if the client really, really needs it, we're gonna be there for them. But I think part of having a culture is also having a life. So if you make that part of it, then people understand that on those rare occasions when you do have to go and work late, that's a part of the deal. We do things like in the summer we have work at home Fridays. People can be anywhere in the world they want. They're all connected on their phone. And I can tell you that everyone worked really hard on those Fridays. First of all, they didn't have to commute, so they gained 2 hours of their day. Everyone's connected via Skype. This one guy is an account supervisor who was kind of an amusing call we had via Skype, and he was in Hawaii for a client call, and for some reason his girlfriend didn't recognize that the video camera was on. And there was a client in the room. I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to embarrass Alex McKee publicly. But it's things like that. So it's a very valid question. I think there's a lot of kind of corporate indoctrination that sometimes goes into making people work like galley slaves in the Ben-Hur film. And you need to turn it around. Because if you actually free people to work where they want to work, and you give them the tools to do it and the culture to help each other, it actually makes for a better overall quality of life. But don't take it from me. Talk to some of the knuckleheads from captains who are here. That's a very fair question.
Oh, I'm just going to assume that a lot of this has to do with sort of how you establish hierarchy or lack thereof in terms of how you run your organization. Could you speak to that?
What we've tried to do is have a less hierarchical structure. So it's a difference between the original Star Trek and Star Trek Next Generation, speaking as a geek. The first Star Trek, Captain Kirk gave all the orders. And there was the number one, he would say, just go warp factor 5. Next Generation, you'd have multiple people on the bridge, and all of a sudden, Deanna Troi is giving the orders. And you kind of look, and you can see the look on the captain's face. He's going, "Oh, yeah, that's cool. That's fine." And so that happens a lot. I mean, honestly, we're still working out how to grow the company and not have a hierarchy. And it's really not easy. And what we're trying to do is think of people who have more experience than you as your coach. So they're there to help, but not hold you underneath their thumb. And we think if we can make that work, we can become really, really successful. But it is a challenge because we have to recognize that there's a value to experience. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't lead to all those different layers that killed the creative? So it's a challenge.
Have you ever been accused of over-promising and under-delivering?
Have we ever been accused of over-promising and under-delivering? We have on occasion been, I can't think of a specific example, but I'm sure it must have happened at some time. We actually, one of the things, it's not a manifesto poster, but we do say we have to under-promise and over-deliver. We're always telling that to each other. Like with our deadlines, if the client really needs it Wednesday for a particular reason, or if it's like a real fire drill, well, we may not necessarily, promise that we can say we're going to do everything we can to make that happen. If it looks like it's not going to happen, we give them fair warning. Because getting back to, service matters, to think, how would I feel if I was that client and I was promised something I didn't get it? So we're always trying to think, what does it mean? Like, how would that person feel if I didn't come through? So it doesn't, I can't think of any incidents happening. We're always trying to think beyond. Because if you get that feeling of really delighting the client, that means you've promised this, but you've done this. And when you do this and you help them be really successful, they hire you again, and they tell everyone else to hire you.
A lot of the points that you talked about in your manifesto, I felt were like tones set by the leaders in your company. What are some of the things that people who are not leaders can do to the company to help turn the ship around and start producing this kind of culture?
I can give you a couple examples. one of the things is, and it's not related to a manifesto poster, but more to just how do you run the company? We've started to redo our whole company website. So I had one idea in my mind of what it could be, and I started down that path. And the other captains really challenged me and said, you know what, it's not good enough. You've got to, as a company, you have to be an example for the industry. You've got to do something really remarkable and just kind of break the mold on this. And we had some very heated, but cordial brainstorms about this. I mean, a lot of them. But the idea of hiring people who are big thinkers, and we tend to hire folks who are strong-willed and really smart, and they have their own opinions and they're not shy about sharing them. So in some ways, everyone has to some degree that leadership quality. And even if I'm hiring or bringing in an intern, 2 captains of industry, I'm looking for someone who could run the company. It's very rare that I would ever hire anyone who comes in and they're, some big agencies refer to those folks in a derogatory way as like the worker bees, which I think is really insulting. And I think, we've done a pretty good job of hiring people who could take over. And they are. I'm really glad they're taking over.
One more question? You always ask me.
You've done a lot for your company since you started. Is there an initiative or an idea that you put out there that totally bombs? And
I think bombing, and the question was, is there ideas you put out that have totally bombed? I think there's things that we've done that bombed in some ways, but there was always some silver lining to the whole thing. I'll give you one example that we worked on a interactive web campaign for a company that was an antimicrobial solution, so you could have your cell phone coated with an antimicrobial thing. And we figured let's do something different for this. And who is it who cares, if the cell phone or the computer keypad or whatever has germs on it? We said moms care about this. So we managed to get Florence Henderson, formerly of the Brady Bunch, like the most iconic mom in American history, to be in a webisode series. It was called That's Revolting. And it was a sort of a modern take on the Brady Bunch with a new modern Brady family in which the family was inadvertently passing germs to each other and making everyone horribly ill. And we actually got the original set from the Brady Bunch on loan from Paramount Pictures. So the night before the shoot, I actually had lunch at the same table as Marsha, and seeing Florence walk on the set in her floral outfit was an absolute jazz. It ended up getting very few web hits because it was so incredibly gross that our intended audience couldn't watch it without vomiting. But we had Florence Henderson, right? And a lot of people thought it was really funny. Not everyone. Some people thought it was too much, but it was Florence Henderson. It was this wild interactive web experience. And a reporter for the Wall Street Journal was Googling, antimicrobial solutions, and we built that keyword in for SEO purposes. And they found it. They had absolutely no PR. The company had no PR to launch this, like virtually no campaign. But a reporter found it. They did a 2-page spread in the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal and had a big picture of Florence Henderson. And lo and behold, the client got bigger clients. Our client landed other partners to put their antimicrobial coatings on. Because they said, oh, you got Florence Henderson, you must be a big company. So it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill, which was, the definition of a successful person is to go from failure to failure with equal enthusiasm. And so in some ways that was a failure, but it was also a big success. But I was disappointed it didn't get 1 million views or millions of views, but it had enough views. It did enough. And if we'd pulled back, if our philosophy had been, let's just do, something that is, a bit safer, then we wouldn't have got Florence Henderson. We wouldn't have got the original Seth and the Brady Bunch. And it wouldn't have worked. So you got to be free to be revolting and be wrong. But good things often come out of when you just kind of, shoot for the fence.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Great. Thank you.